At approximately 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon, Eastern Daylight Time, a single unexplained sonic boom traveled across eastern Massachusetts and shook buildings from the North Shore to Cape Cod. Boston police dispatched units expecting an explosion. They found nothing. It is the second event of its kind on the United States East Coast in 72 hours. The first, 3 days ago in South Carolina, sits in the Federal Earthquake Catalog with conventional sources publicly ruled out and no attribution. In the next 20 minutes, you will know exactly what produced both, what the federal record shows, and what to watch for next. At approximately 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon, Eastern Daylight Time, a single, intense, building-shaking boom traveled across eastern Massachusetts. Residents from the North Shore, down through Cambridge, across Boston proper, out along the South Shore, and onto Cape Cod reported the same event. Boston police dispatched units to the Brighton neighborhood after multiple emergency calls described what sounded like an explosion. No explosion source was located on the ground. Within 90 minutes, the regional meteorological community had converged on a single attribution. The boom was almost certainly a bolide, a meteor entering the atmosphere over the Atlantic, breaking apart in the upper troposphere, and producing a pressure wave that propagated westward and inland to the coast. That event would, by itself, be a notable story, but it was the second one this week. 3 days earlier, on the afternoon of Thursday, May 28th, an almost identical event occurred 800 miles to the south, over the Midlands of South Carolina. The United States Geological Survey logged it into the official earthquake catalog under an event type designation the agency almost never uses. Sonic boom. More than 1,400 people filed felt response reports. Buildings shook. Airport hangars rattled. And as of this morning, more than 3 days after the catalog entry was opened, the question of what produced that boom remains, in the formal sense, unanswered. NASA ruled out a meteor. The Air Force ruled out its aircraft. The closest National Guard fighter base did not respond. 2 large unexplained sonic booms. Same coast, same week. One got an answer in 90 minutes. The other is still sitting in the federal catalog with no source attached. The gap between those 2 attributions is the central operational fact in this story, and it is what the rest of this report is built around. The Massachusetts event registered across an unusually large geographic footprint. Within the first 3 hours after the boom, public reports were verified from Scituate, Winchester, Arlington, Cambridge, Concord, Linfield, Wayland, Brighton, and from neighborhoods throughout the city of Boston. Reports also emerged from communities along the North Shore and from Cape Cod, with additional viewer reports collected from western Massachusetts. The felt radius extends across at least the full greater Boston metropolitan area and outward to communities 40 miles from the urban core. The pattern of the reports is what matters. A pressure wave that produces a tight footprint clustered within a few miles of a single point is consistent with a small ground level event. A pressure wave that produces a broad footprint, scattered across 40 or 50 or 80 miles in multiple directions, is consistent with something occurring high in the atmosphere, with the pressure radiating outward from an elevated source point. The Boston event yesterday produced the second profile. Something happened in the air, not at the ground. The first public attempt at an attribution came from the chief meteorologist of WBZ in Boston, Eric Fisher, one of the most followed regional meteorologists in New England. Within approximately 90 minutes of the event, Fisher posted publicly that he had checked the federal earthquake feed and found no earthquake associated with the boom. He suggested the source might be a meteor. Approximately 1 hour after that, Fisher posted a follow-up. He had now confirmed, in his professional opinion, that the source was indeed a meteor. The professional consensus across the regional meteorological community converged on the same conclusion within the next 60 minutes. The attribution moved from open mystery to closed case in under 2 hours. That speed of attribution is unusual, and it was made possible by a single piece of evidence that arrived from 22,000 miles above the surface. The Geostationary Operational Environmental Satellite, designated GOES-19, is the newest of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's geostationary weather satellites. It reached operational status in 2025. It sits at a geosynchronous orbit 22,236 miles above the equator, in a fixed position over the Western Hemisphere. From that vantage, its instruments observe the same continents, the same oceans, and the same atmospheric layer continuously, every second of every day. One of those instruments is the Geostationary Lightning Mapper. The Lightning Mapper does exactly what its name suggests. It maps lightning. It does this by taking approximately 500 frames per second of the entire visible hemisphere, looking for sudden brief flashes of light against the background of the planet. When a sudden brightness anomaly appears in a specific pixel and lasts for a small number of frames, the instrument records it as a flash event, with a timestamp accurate to within a millisecond and a location accurate to within a few kilometers. The Lightning Mapper is calibrated for lightning, but its sensitivity also makes it sensitive to other transient bright events. The most important of these, for the purpose of this story, are bolides. When a bolide enters the atmosphere, the friction of entry heats the object to incandescence. If the object is large enough, the heating cascades into rapid fragmentation, with the entering body breaking apart over the course of a few seconds and releasing its kinetic energy as a burst of visible light. From the perspective of a satellite in geostationary orbit, a bolide breakup looks like a sudden brief flash, lasting from a few hundred milliseconds to a few seconds, with no associated storm structure beneath it. That is exactly what the Lightning Mapper aboard GOES-19 registered yesterday afternoon over the Atlantic east of the Massachusetts coastline. A flash. No correlating thunderstorm. The skies above eastern Massachusetts at the time of the event were largely clear. The signature is consistent with a bolide breakup. The instrument has documented prior bolide detection capability. A peer-reviewed analysis by the Cooperative Institute for Meteorological Satellite Studies at the University of Wisconsin documented the Lightning Mapper's capture of a bolide entry over Lake Erie and northern Ohio in March of this year, with the satellite's frame-by-frame data establishing the signature in technical terms. So yesterday's attribution chain is straightforward. A flash on the satellite, no storm beneath it, a felt boom along the coast minutes later, a converging public consensus among professional meteorologists within 90 minutes. The American Meteor Society's pending Fireball Reports Q began collecting eyewitness submissions from across the region within hours. The case is on a trajectory to be formally closed within days. That is what attribution looks like when the evidence is there. Now consider what attribution looks like when it is not. On the afternoon of Thursday, May 28th, at 24 minutes past 5 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time, an almost identical event occurred 800 miles to the south of where yesterday's Boston boom landed. The location, 6 kilometers northeast of an unincorporated community called St. Andrews in the Midlands of South Carolina, just outside the city of Columbia. The felt radius exceeded 100 miles. More than 1,400 people submitted felt response reports to the federal Did You Feel It system in the first 24 hours. The maximum reported intensity reached 6 on the modified Mercalli scale, the level at which buildings begin to sustain minor structural damage. The United States Geological Survey assigned the event a unique catalog identifier, US 7000 SP6M. The agency classified the event under an event type designation that the Federal Earthquake Catalog almost never uses. Sonic boom. The magnitude field was given a value of 0.0 because the magnitude scales used in seismology are calibrated for earthquakes, for the elastic release of subsurface strain, and they do not produce a meaningful value when applied to atmospheric pressure events. The depth field was given a value of 0 kilometers because the source of the pressure wave was in the air above the surface, not in the rock below it. The decision to log the event with a sonic boom event type designation is the part of this story that, on closer reading, becomes the thing the federal record is pointing at. The overwhelming majority of public boom reports the USGS receives are processed through the Did You Feel It system and never produce a catalog entry. They resolve into small earthquakes, sensor artifacts, or nuisance reports. The decision to log an event with a unique identifier and an explicit sonic boom designation is uncommon. It is the kind of catalog action that signals the agency considered the event significant enough to record with a permanent public entry, and confident enough about what the event was not to give the entry a name. But the name the agency gave the entry describes the physics of the pressure wave. It does not describe the source. A sonic boom is what happens when something moves through the atmosphere faster than the speed of sound. The catalog tells the reader what kind of pressure wave arrived at the surface. It does not tell the reader what produced it. In the days following the May 28th event, 3 federal entities engaged publicly with the question of what had produced the boom. Their disclosures were specific. The pattern they produced is the most informative piece of the South Carolina case. The first was the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. NASA confirmed on the record that no fireball was detected by any of its observational assets during the relevant window. The agency's detection chain includes the same Geostationary Lightning Mapper that, 2 days later, would register the Massachusetts event so cleanly. It also includes the Center for Near-Earth Object Studies Fireball Detection Network. If a bolide had entered the atmosphere over central South Carolina with sufficient energy to produce a 100-mile felt footprint and an intensity 6 pressure wave, the probability that none of NASA's detection systems would register it is, by the agency's own characterization, low. The second federal entity was Shaw Air Force Base, located in Sumter, South Carolina, approximately 40 kilometers east-southeast of the cataloged source point. Shaw is the home of the 20th Fighter Wing of the United States Air Force, which operates F-16 Fighting Falcon aircraft. The F-16 is supersonic capable. Shaw confirmed on the record that none of its based aircraft were operating in supersonic flight conditions during the event window. The third federal entity was McEntire Joint National Guard Base, located in Eastover, South Carolina, approximately 30 kilometers east of the catalog source point. McEntire is the home of the 169th Fighter Wing of the South Carolina Air National Guard, which operates F-16 Fighting Falcon Block 52 aircraft. These are advanced variants of the platform, optimized for the modern fighter mission set. They are, like all F-16s, supersonic capable. McEntire did not issue a public statement. It did not confirm. It did not deny. It did not provide a public characterization of its flight operations on the afternoon of May 28th. The silence of McEntire is consistent with 2 readings. The first is that Air National Guard installations typically do not publicly characterize their training flight operations in real time, and that the absence of a statement reflects routine practice rather than a deliberate decision to withhold information. The second is that the airspace over central South Carolina at the relevant time hosted activity. The base is not authorized to characterize publicly. The available data does not distinguish between these readings. But the asymmetry, NASA speaking, Shaw speaking, McEntire silent, is the structure that focuses public attention on the question of what was in the airspace. There is a piece of the South Carolina geography that, when added to the case, changes the shape of the question. The cataloged source point at 6 kilometers north-northeast of St. Andrews falls within the active footprint of an ongoing earthquake swarm. The swarm is centered near Lake Murray, a 40-mile-long reservoir located approximately 10 miles west of the cataloged point. The swarm has been producing measurable seismicity since February of this year. The largest events have reached the high magnitude 2 range. The swarm is one of 2 active swarm clusters in the broader Midlands corridor. The second, near the town of Elgin, has been active since late 2021 and has produced hundreds of cataloged events. Both swarms occur along strands of what the USGS classifies as the Eastern Piedmont Fault System. The system is the structural remnant of the Appalachian orogeny, the mountain-building event that constructed the Proto-Appalachian Range approximately 300 million years ago. The system has been geologically quiet at the surface for the entirety of recorded human history, until December of 2021. The rate of seismicity in the broader Midlands region since the Elgin swarm began is, by the USGS's own assessment, the highest measured in the historical instrumental record for the region. This is happening in a part of the continent that, for most of the 20th century, was classified as effectively stable. The reactivation of the Eastern Piedmont strands is unusual. It is not unprecedented globally. Other ancient intraplate systems have reactivated under modern stress conditions. But the rate at which it is happening in South Carolina, and the fact that it has been sustained for over 4 years, has the structural geology community paying close attention. The geophysical literature on seismo-atmospheric coupling proposes a mechanism by which rapid energy release at a shallow fault interface can couple into the lower atmosphere through surface ground motion, producing an acoustic signature at the surface that resembles a sonic boom, but originates from below rather than above. The literature is not yet established as mainstream science. The USGS has not invoked this mechanism in its public characterization of the May 28th event. But the geographic collocation of the boom with the active fault system below, on the same afternoon, is the kind of coincidence the literature would predict to occasionally produce. The May 28th boom occurred at 0 kilometers depth, directly above a system that is producing record-breaking shallow activity at 3 to 7 kilometers depth. The collocation is on the record. The mechanism is not established. And the connection, if there is one, will only become visible if additional events follow. The candidate explanation for the May 28th event that has received the most attention in the online discussion is undisclosed military or aerospace test activity. The United States military has, over the past several years, operated an active hypersonic flight test program. The program is distributed across the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, the United States Air Force Research Laboratory, and the United States Army Hypersonic and Conventional Strike Office. The vehicles under test include the X-60 Hypersonic Flight Research Vehicle, the AGM-183 Air-Launched Rapid Response Weapon, the Common Hypersonic Glide Body, and the Long-Range Hypersonic Weapon. The acoustic signatures these vehicles produce during flight test are, in general, distinguishable from conventional supersonic aircraft, but they fall within the same broad envelope as a large sonic boom. A hypersonic glide body traveling at Mach 5 or above through the upper atmosphere produces a pressure wave that arrives at the surface as a prolonged low-frequency boom. From the perspective of a witness on the ground, the signature can be similar enough to a conventional sonic boom that the two are not always distinguishable without instrumented analysis. The Department of Defense does not pre-announce hypersonic flight tests over the continental United States. The tests are conducted under operational secrecy, with airspace restrictions managed through Federal Aviation Administration coordination, but without public disclosure of the test schedule. If a hypersonic flight test had been the source of the May 28th boom, the federal disclosure pattern would look approximately the way it does. NASA, which is not in the chain of command for military hypersonic testing, would be free to confirm a negative finding for the meteor hypothesis. Shaw Air Force Base, which operates conventional supersonic aircraft but is not directly involved in hypersonic test operations, would be free to confirm a negative finding for its own assets. McIntyre, which would either have been operating routine training flights or might have been hosting transient operations from other commands, would not be expected to publicly characterize the airspace activity. This pattern is not proof that a hypersonic test occurred. It is consistent with the pattern of disclosure that a hypersonic test would produce. It is also consistent with other readings, including a conventional supersonic aircraft on routine operations whose public attribution simply has not closed. The data does not require the test interpretation, but the broader context of expanded hypersonic testing in the southeastern United States and the regional pattern of unattributed boom reports along the Carolinas coast over the past several years has produced an inference that some segment of the public has drawn. The structural difference between the Massachusetts attribution and the South Carolina attribution comes down to a single fact. The Massachusetts event produced satellite evidence. The South Carolina event did not. The Geostationary Lightning Mapper detected a flash over the Atlantic east of the Massachusetts coastline with no correlating thunderstorm within minutes of the boom. The same instrument did not register a corresponding flash for the South Carolina event 2 days earlier. NASA confirmed this in its public negative finding for the meteor hypothesis. The presence or absence of that single piece of satellite evidence is what determines the speed of attribution. When the evidence is there, the regional meteorological community can converge on a confident attribution in 90 minutes. When the evidence is not there, the federal infrastructure cannot manufacture one. The catalog entry stays open, the agencies engage to the extent their disclosure norms allow, and the question moves into a longer time frame. That is what the system is designed to do. The Federal Earthquake Catalog is not a propaganda instrument. It is a scientific and operational record, and it is structured to be explicit about what is known and what is not. The May 28th event being open in the catalog is not, by itself, evidence of any specific theory about its source. It is evidence that the federal record is accurately representing the current state of public attribution. The system attributes when it can. It holds the question open when it cannot. What the rest of us are watching, in real time, is the operation of this system across two events with very different evidence profiles. The Massachusetts event will most likely close as a confirmed bolide within days. The South Carolina event will, by one of three trajectories, either receive a positive attribution from the agencies involved, become part of a longer multi-event pattern that the agencies will eventually have to publicly characterize, or settle into the catalog as one more entry that the system was unable to resolve in real time. Each of those trajectories has historical precedent in the catalog record. The next several days are the most likely window for additional public statements from the federal agencies engaged with the May 28th event. The first few days after a federally cataloged event are when the rate of agency disclosure is at its highest, and after approximately 1 week, the rate typically drops sharply as the entry transitions toward whichever long-term trajectory it will follow. Within that window, two specific developments would be most informative. A public statement from the Department of Defense addressing the question of military airspace activity over central South Carolina on May 28th would move the case toward a positive attribution. A reclassification of yesterday's Providence County seismic signature as a confirmed atmospheric event linked to the Massachusetts bolide would close that case formally. Beyond the immediate window, the most important variable is whether a third event of similar character occurs along the East Coast within the next several days or weeks. If it does, the temporal clustering will shift from a two-event coincidence to a multi-event pattern, and the agencies will be required to engage at a different level. If it does not, the South Carolina entry will settle into the federal record as one of several historical sonic boom event-type entries that remain without a confirmed source designation. What this report has tried to make clear is that the asymmetry between the two attribution patterns, Massachusetts closed in 90 minutes, South Carolina still opened 3 days later, is the operative fact in this case. The asymmetry is not the source of the mystery. It is the structure of the record, and the record is doing what it is designed to do. It is recording what is known. It is leaving open what is not. And the next entry, whenever and wherever it lands, is the data point the federal infrastructure is waiting for.